February 1897, New York City, the Waldorf Hotel. And inside, there's a party going on that people will still be arguing about 130 years later.
Really? Okay, John, so give it to me. Set the scene.
700 guests, everybody in costume, French royalty mostly. Marie Antoinette is a popular choice, which historically is a bold pick.
Oh no.
One man came in a suit of gold inland armor that reportedly cost $10,000 in 1897. There were so many diamonds in the room, they hired Pinkerton detectives to stand around in costume so the security wouldn't ruin the vibe.
And the whole thing cost about $369,000 in 1897.
Which sounds quaint until you translate it. That's well over 10 million in today's money for one night for a costume party.
And outside that hotel?
Outside that hotel, America is in year 4 of the worst depression it had ever had up to that point. The panic of 1893, hundreds of banks gone, hundreds of railroads bankrupt, unemployment somewhere around 18-20%, depending who's counting, soup lines, people generally hungry in that city that winter.
And the papers noticed?
The papers ate them alive. Preachers gave sermons about it. There were protests, and here's my favorite detail in the whole story. The backlash got so bad that the hosts, the Bradley Martins, basically fled the country, moved to England because the city tax assessor took one look at that party and doubled their taxes.
The assessor read the society papers and went, well, clearly you can afford more.
$10 million party immediately followed by a tax bill and an ocean voyage. There's something almost clean about it.
So here's a question I can't stop turning over. Not were rich people tacky in 1897? I mean, that's very obvious at this point, right? A little bit too on the nose with the Marie Antoinette there. The real one is how does a society get there? Because that gap didn't happen by accident. Somebody built the conditions that produced a room full of diamonds inside and soup lines outside. And it's not weather, it's not luck.
It's a recipe.
It's a recipe. And tonight we're going to read you that recipe, every ingredient, and we're going to ask the uncomfortable question, which is whether anybody's got that cookbook open right now today.
And then the part that actually matters for anybody listening, because every time one of these things ends, every crash, every panic, every debt crisis, there's a bill. And somebody has to pay it. And there's a whole argument about who should, and a completely separate reality about who actually does.
Yeah, for sure. And those two things are almost never the same people.
Volume 13.
Who pays the bill? This is the sovereign system where the fringe meets the framework. Every claim source, the full list is in the show notes, both sides on the table. We don't hand you conclusions, we hand you tools, and then we turn those tools on ourselves.
Tonight, the recipe for a Gilded Age, every ingredient from the 1870s, whether anybody's cooking from it now, and the oldest trick in economics, how a bill gets handed to the people, least able to pay it, while everybody applauds the responsibility of it. Volume 13, Who Pays the Bill? Okay, read me the recipe. How do you build a Gilded Age from scratch?
All right, John, so we have 6 ingredients. And the thing to notice is that not one of them is evil on its own. Most of them are actually good things. It's a combination that's lethal.
Start me.
All right, ingredient one, a genuine technological explosion. The railroad, steel, oil, electricity, the telegraph. In about 30 years, America goes from a farm country to the biggest industrial economy on earth. And that's not a bad thing. That's an astonishing thing. Enormous wealth gets created.
Created, not stolen. That's a real distinction.
And it matters. And the honest version of the story has to say it. Real value got built. Ingredient two, no rules, and I mean essentially none. No income tax that doesn't show up until 1913. No antitrust enforcement worth the name, no workplace safety laws, no minimum wage, no limit on hours, no child labor laws with teeth. And if you got hurt in a factory, that was your problem and often legally your fault.
So enormous new wealth pouring into a container with no walls.
Ingredient three. And this is the one that turns a boom into a dynasty: consolidation. Because in a market with no antitrust, the winners don't just win, they buy the game. Oil consolidates until one company controls something like 90% of American refining. Steel consolidates, the railroads form pools and set prices together.
That's Kevin. That's literally Kevin from last episode with the pickles.
Yeah, it's exactly like Kevin on a national scale with actual armed men. And once you're that big, you stop being a company and start being infrastructure. And if you're a farmer in Kansas and one railroad is the only way to get your wheat to market, that railroad can charge you whatever it wants. You have no exit.
Ingredient 4.
Buying the government. And this is the part where it stops being a economic story and becomes a democracy story. State legislatures back then chose U.S. Senators, not voters. So if you wanted to a senator, you didn't win an election, you bought a legislature. It was cheaper. The Senate got nicknamed the Millionaires Club. There's a famous cartoon from the period, giant bloated moneybag man labeled with trusts looming over tiny senators.
And people just knew like it wasn't a secret.
It was actually completely out in the open, and that's what makes the era so wild to read about. Nobody was hiding it. It was just there. Ingredient 5, labor with no leverage, enormous immigration, millions of people arriving, desperate for work, which is great for a country long term and brutal for wages short term. Plus, mechanization, making skilled crafts replaceable. Unions were often treated as criminal conspiracies, and strikes got you broken by private armies and sometimes federal troops.
So workers can't bargain, and there's always somebody hungrier behind them.
And ingredient 6, the one that nobody talks about, and it's my favorite because it's so boring and so devastating: the money itself. This is the gold standard fight, and it sounds like the dullest thing in the world.
It sounds incredibly dull, Dave.
And it's the reason for the most famous speeches in American history. Here's the mechanic: the economy is growing fast, but the money supply is tied to how much gold exists, so there's not enough money chasing a growing pile of goods. Prices fall for decades.
Falling prices sounds good. Things get cheaper.
Unless you owe money. Say you're a farmer, you borrow $1,000 to buy land. Prices fall by a third over the next decade. You still owe $1,000, but the wheat you sell to pay it back is worth way less. Your debt effectively grew while you slept.
Oh, that's vicious. So deflation is a wealth transfer.
Yes, it's a wealth transfer from debtors to creditors, automatically, quietly, every single year. Millions of farmers slowly ground down in favor of having people holding the paper. And that's what produces the speech. In 1896, William Jennings Bryan at the Democratic Convention, and the line is: "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold."
Okay, that's a hell of a line about monetary policy. Nobody's writing bars like that about the money supply anymore.
Yeah, and that's the whole point. Back then, people understood that plumbing and money was the political fight. It wasn't technical. It was who gets ground down.
So put the 6 together for me.
Explosive new wealth, no rules on it, consolidation into monopolies, a government that's purchasable, labor with no bargaining power, and a money system that quietly transfers wealth upwards while everyone sleeps.
And that's the room with the diamonds and the soup line outside.
That's the room. And here's the thing: Mark Twain nailed it, and people always get the name wrong. Gilded doesn't mean golden. Gilding is a thin layer of gold over cheap base metal. He meant looks magnificent and underneath it's garbage. It was an insult and it stuck for a century and a half.
All right, so that's the recipe, which leaves the obvious, uncomfortable question hanging in the room.
Yeah.
Is anybody cooking? Because I went through those 6 ingredients in my head while you were talking, and I got a number I didn't love.
Yep, so did I, and I want to do that carefully, and I want to be honest about the ones that don't match because they don't all match, and the ones that don't are the most important part of the whole comparison.
Go ingredient by ingredient, score it honestly.
Okay, one, technical explosion creating enormous wealth. Obviously, yes, software, the internet, now AI, same shape as railroads, a new thing that recognizes the entire economy and mints fortunes at a speed that looks unreal.
2. No rules.
Partial. And this is where you have to be precise instead of dramatic. We are not in the no rules world. There's a whole regulatory state that doesn't exist in 1890, but there's a real documented direction of travel. Financial deregulation from the 80s through the 90s, antitrust enforcement that narrowly, dramatically for about 40 years, and the whole new industries that grew up largely outside the old rule book because the rule book didn't anticipate them.
So, not no brakes, more like the brakes were loosened in new vehicles that never had brakes installed.
That's a fair way to put it. Three, consolidation. This one's strong. Concentration has risen across a huge range of American industries, not just tech, airlines, hospitals, meatpacking, eyeglasses, cell carriers. In a lot of markets, you've got three or four firms and a comfortable understanding.
The eyeglasses one always kills me. One company makes basically every frame.
And you feel it at the register. Four, money in politics. Also strong, though the mechanism changed. Nobody's handing cash to the state legislature to pick a senator anymore because we fixed that specific hole in 1913 with a direct election. Now it's campaign finance and lobbying, which is much more sanitized and much larger.
Five, 5 labor?
Union membership in the private sector has fallen for roughly a third of the workers in the 50s to around 6% now. That's the biggest structural change in the American working workers' bargaining position in a century, and it barely gets discussed.
6. The money plumbing?
Different and arguably reversed. We've had inflation, not deflation, and a central bank that intervenes constantly. But there's a version of the same complaint that when the system wobbles, the interventions reliably protect asset holders first, and asset holders are disproportionately at the top. Different plumbing, similar direction of flow.
And the actual inequality number, because that's the scoreboard.
The shape of it is the thing. And if you chart the share of income going to the top 1% across the last 120 years, you get a U. High in the Gilded Age, all the way up through the 20s, then it collapses, the Depression, the New Deal, the war, and then declares a broadly shared middle class boom. Economists call the middle stretch the Great Compression. And then from 1980, it climbs back up, and it's been climbing ever since.
Back to where, Dave?
Back into the neighborhood of where it was before the crash. Not identical, measurements differ, economists argue about the exact numbers, and you should be suspicious of anybody who gives you one clean figure, but the U is real and basically nobody disputes the shape.
Okay, now do the part where it doesn't match, because if we just stack up 6 yeses and walk off, we're doing the thing we've always say we hate.
Right, and there are four big disanalogs, and they're not small. One, the safety net exists: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, disability. In 1893, if you lost your job at 60, you had you, your family, or you had nothing. That's a categorical difference in what a downturn does to a person.
2?
The absolute standard of living. The median person today lives materially better than the median person in 1897 by almost an incomprehensible margin. Antibiotics, refrigeration, a child mortality rate that would have looked like witchcraft to them. Inequality is back to Gilded Age levels is a statement about the gap, not about the floor, and the floor is dramatically higher.
3?
Antitrust and labor laws exist even where they're weakly enforced, which means the tools are on the shelf. Nobody has to invent them from scratch. They can be picked back up. That's genuinely a different situation from 1890 when the entire legal concept had to be built from scratch.
And 4?
Globally, this era coincided with the largest reduction in extreme poverty in human history. Hundreds of millions of people. If your model is the modern economy only immiserates, the fact has to be explained and mostly it just gets skipped.
So it's a rhyme, not a copy.
Yeah, it's a rhyme, not a copy. And I think the honest framing, the one that survives contact with somebody who disagrees with you, is this. The ingredients are largely back, but last time the thing that ended the Gilded Age wasn't a revolution, it was breaks, antitrust, the income tax, labor law, food and drug rules. So the actual live question isn't, is it 1897 again? It's, are the breaks we built still connected?
That's the runaway test from last episode.
Yeah, same question amplified to a different century, and then set us up the fight we're actually here for. Because when one of these errors eventually cracks, when the panic comes, the crash, the debt crisis,
There's a bill.
there's always a bill. And what happens next is the most reliable pattern in economic history, and there's an extraordinarily and extremely respectable, extremely popular argument for handling it in a way that, when you actually check the results, has a track record that surprised even the people who prescribed to it.
And I want that argument made properly, not the cartoon of it.
You're going to get the best version I can build because a lot of it is genuinely correct. Okay, Steelman. When a government's finances blow up, deficits huge, debt's climbing, the standard prescription is fiscal consolidation, austerity, if you want the food word. Cut spending, raise some taxes, get the books back in order. And here's the honest, strongest case for it, and I want to make it well enough that somebody who believes this nods along.
Go.
Argument one, and it's the one everyone feels in their gut. A country is like a household. You cannot spend more than you take in forever. Every family knows that. At some point, the credit card comes due, and pretending otherwise is a fantasy that eventually mugs you.
And the institution is powerful because in a household it's just true.
It's completely true in a household. Argument two. And this one's harder and more real. Interest. Debt isn't free. Every year you pay interest on it, and that money doesn't educate a child or fix a bridge. It goes to bondholders. Let debt run high enough, and interest rates start to eat the budget from the inside, crowding out the actual government. That's not an ideology, that's arithmetic.
3.
The market can just stop. And this one is what people forget when they argue about this in the abstract. A government running deficits needs somebody to lend it money. It's if lenders lose confidence, they demand higher interest rates, which makes the debt worse, which spooks them more, and it can spiral in weeks. And here's the crucial part, John. When that happens, austerity isn't a policy choice; it's a consequence. Greece in 2010 could not borrow, nobody would lend, and at that point, just spend more is not an available option. It's like telling someone whose card is declined to simply buy the thing anyways.
That's a generally important distinction, and I've never heard anybody make it on a podcast.
It matters enormously, and it gets skipped by everybody who wants a clean villain. Argument 4, crowding out. When the government borrows heavily, it competes with private businesses for the same pool of savings, which can push up borrowing costs for everybody else and squeeze out private investment.
5.
Moral hazard and fairness across time. If a government can always borrow its way out, what's the incentive to ever be disciplined? And the debt you run up doesn't vanish, it gets handed to the people who aren't born yet and never got a vote on it. There's a real moral argument there about not sending the bill to your grandchildren.
And does it ever actually work? Because that's the empirical question.
Sometimes, yes, and the honest version has to include those. The Baltic countries in 2008, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania went through savage consolidation, and they took a brutal hit and then recovered relatively quickly and stayed in the euro system. Their governments will tell you that it worked, and there was serious academic work in the 2000s arguing that a credible shared consolidation could actually be expansionary. That if you convince markets and businesses you've got your act together, confidence and investment come rushing back and you grow through it.
That's the confidence fairy thing people mock.
Critics call it that, yes, but it was serious economics from serious economists at serious universities, and it was enormously influenced in the early 2010s. And there was one more piece of ammunition. Probably the single most influential economics paper of that decade, two Harvard economists published a study that once government debt crosses about 90% of the size of your economy, growth falls off the cliff.
A specific number, 90%. That's a very quotable, very actionable number.
It was everywhere. Finance ministers cited it, legislators cited it on floor speeches. It gave the whole austerity program a hard scientific edge. This isn't a values judgment. This was a cliff, and here's what it is.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. There's a much stronger case than I expected walking in. The household thing is intuitive. The interest thing is arithmetic. The sometimes nobody will lend to you thing is a fact, and there's a hard number backing it.
And that's why it won the argument. Across Europe and the varying degrees elsewhere, that was the program after 2010. This wasn't fringe, it was a consensus of finance ministers and central banks and international institutions.
So what happens?
So they ran it on a continent for years, which means usually for economics, we actually got to see the results.
And
And one of those two pillars was demolished by a graduate student doing his homework, and the other one got taken apart on a paper written by a chief economist of the institution that had been prescribing the medicine.
they graded their own work and failed themselves.
And public, and I have enormous respect for it, and we're going to walk through exactly what they found.
Start with the graduate student because I've been waiting for this my whole life.
Yeah, sure you have there, man. 2013, a doctoral student at UMass Amherst named Thomas Herdon. He's got a class assignment. Pick a famous economics paper and try to replicate the results. He picks the 90% debt cliff paper, and he can't reproduce it. He tries and tries, and his numbers keep coming out differently.
And a normal grad student assumes he's the idiot.
Which he did for a while, and then he asks the original authors for their spreadsheet, and to their credit, they send it, and he opens it up, and there are three problems. Two are methodological judgment calls you could argue about. Some countries got left out of the average, and the way that they weighted the data made one country's single bad year count as much as another country's 19 good years.
And the third?
The third is that the formula didn't select all the rows. Five countries got left out of a key average because of where the highlighted box stopped.
A spreadsheet error.
A spreadsheet error. Yep.
The number that European finance ministers quoted in speeches that shaped budgets for 100 million people was partly a drag box mistake in Excel.
And when you correct all three issues, the cliff mostly disappears. The original said high debt countries shrank slightly, negative growth corrected, high debt countries grew, just more modestly. There's no cliff, there's a gentle slope.
Okay, but I want to be fair here because we'd hammer somebody else for overclaiming. Does that mean debt doesn't matter?
No, and this is exactly where honest people separate from partisans. Even after the correction, higher debt still correlates with somewhat slower growth, and there's a live argument about which way the causation runs. Does high debt slow growth, or does slow growth create high debt? Probably both. What died was the threshold, the idea that there's a specific line and crossing it triggers catastrophe, and therefore you must cut immediately no matter what else is happening. That it was the part doing the political work and the part that was the spreadsheet.
All right, now the institution grading itself.
This one I find genuinely remarkable as a piece of intellectual honesty. When the IMF and others were designing these programs, they used a number called the fiscal multiplier. It just means if a government cuts spending by $1, how much does the economy shrink? They assumed it would be about half. Cut $1, lose 50 cents of output, painful but manageable.
And the real number, Dave?
The IMF's own chief economist and a colleague went back and checked the forecasts again, what actually happened across dozens of countries, and the real multiplier in that period was somewhere between 9 tenths and 1.7.
So they thought a dollar of costs or cuts cost 50 cents of economy?
And actually costs around a dollar, sometimes more than a dollar, which means in a lot of cases you cut spending to shrink the deficit, the economy shrank faster than the deficit did. Tax revenue falls because there's less activity, you end up chasing your own tail.
And the actual admission?
Their published language was that forecasts had significantly underestimated the negative short term growth effects of fiscal consolidation. In the institutional speak, this is a scream.
That's an apology in a lab coat.
And I want to flag the honest limit because it matters. That effect was strongly early in the crisis when interest rates were pinned near zero and economies were deeply depressed. It is not a universal law that cutting always costs more than you save. It's a statement about doing it at the worst possible moment when everything else is already contracting.
Which is a very Keynesian idea, right? Don't all tighten at once.
It's the oldest one in the book. If one household tightens its belt, it saves money. If every household and the government all tighten at once, everybody's spending is somebody else's income. So total income falls and nobody ends up better off. What's true for one is false for all. That's the flaw hiding inside the household metaphor from Act 3. A country isn't a household because a household spending isn't its own income.
And the austerity can be expansionary research.
Later work using a more careful going through the actual historical record of what governments announced and why, instead of inferring it from statistics, found the opposite. Consolidations reduced output in private demand around half of 8% of output loss for every 1% of GDP cut. A couple years out, the confidence effect didn't show up the way the theory needed it to.
Okay, give me the country, the place where we can just look.
Greece. And I want to say clearly that Greece had real self inflicted problems. The books had been misreported, the state genuinely needed reform, and nobody seriously disputes that. This isn't a story about innocent victims of pure malice, it's a story about the dosage.
What happened?
The economy contracted about 25%, a quarter of the entire economy gone. That's Great Depression scale. Unemployment peaked around 27%, youthful unemployment went above 50, some measures higher, wages and pensions cut repeatedly.
And the debt, because that was the entire point of the exercise.
The debt to GDP ratio actually went up. It was around 130% when the program started. It ended up around 180.
Wait, say that again. They cut everything to fix the debt ratio, and the debt ratio got worse?
Because it's a ratio, debt over economy. They attacked the top of the fraction while the bottom of the fraction collapsed 25%. And the researchers went back and found the Greek multiplier was well above 1, not the zero point 0.5 that the programs were designed around.
So the medicine was calibrated with the wrong number, and the number was off by a factor of 2 or 3. And by the time anybody checked, a quarter of the economy was gone.
That's a fair summary of the mainstream retrospective. Now, I'll give the other side its due one more time. Some economists argued the alternative, disorderly default leaving the euro, a currency collapse, could have been even worse. That's a real argument, but the alternative might have been worse is a long way from this works.
Okay, so now the actual question of the episode. 25% of the economy is a number. Who held that? Because the country didn't pay it. Countries don't have wallets. People do.
Right, and this is where you have to look at composition because it's the whole ball game. There are two ways to close a budget gap: raise revenue or cut spending, and they do not land on the same people.
Walk me through it.
When consolidation is done mainly through cuts to public services and benefits, healthcare, disability support, housing assistance, local services, pensions, the values of those services is a much larger share of a poor household's real income than a rich one's. If you earn a fortune, the local library closing is an inconvenience. If you're poor, the clinic closing might be your only health care. The same cut is a paper cut for one person and an amputation for another.
And the flip side?
Consolidation done mainly through progressive taxation lands on people with more capacity to absorb it, the same deficit reduction, completely different distribution, which is why the honest sentence isn't Acerity is regressive. Its acerity as typical practice, which has leaned heavily on spending cuts, has been regressive. The regressiveness isn't the arithmetic of balancing a budget, it's a choice of which lever.
And that choice is political, not technical.
The choice is entirely political, just as technical, and there's a body of public health research contested in its size. I want to be careful, but it exists and it's serious, linking sustained cuts to measurable health outcomes. Deaths that show up in the statistics after services are withdrawn. I'm not going to throw a big number at you because the estimates vary a lot, and I don't want to be the guy waving a scary figure around. But the direction of the research is not ambiguous, and the human beings inside those studies were real.
And then the last piece, where did the money actually go? Because everyone talked about Greece being bailed out, which sounds like somebody handed Greece money.
The large majority of those bailout funds went to servicing existing debt and the creditors. That's the widely reported accounting, which reframes the entire thing. It wasn't primarily a transfer to Greek citizens, it was largely a transfer through Greece to the people who had lent to Greece. Meanwhile, the pensions cuts landed on the pensioners.
So the bill said Greece, the payment came out of the pockets of Greek workers and retirees, and the money went to bondholders in other countries.
That's the structure, and notice how it was sold because the language is the last piece of the machine. We must live within our means. Shared sacrifice. Tighten our belts. There is no alternative.
Shared sacrifice is doing an unbelievable amount of work in that sentence.
Every word of it is a claim about who in the we, and that's the thing we can hand people tonight because this isn't only about governments. The exact move, a real cost, a story about shared sacrifice, and a quiet reality about who actually absorbs it happens at every scale of human life,
Including in a company, including in a family.
including in a group project, a divorce, a friend group, a lease, and economists have a proper name for this, and it's one of the most useful concepts nobody outside the field has ever heard. The concept is called incidence, and economists distinguish between two things that sound identical and aren't. There is statutory incidence, whose name is legally on the bill, and then there's economic incidence, whose standard of living actually drops.
And they're different.
They're constantly different. Put a tax on a company, the company's name is on the bill, but the cost gets distributed, some to shareholders, some to customers through prices, some to workers through wages. The legal payer and the real payer are two different questions, and only one of them is announced.
So the tool is stop reading the name on the envelope and go find whose life actually got smaller.
Four questions, the incidence test, and the one underneath all four. Who's really holding the bill, and who told me it was mine? The incidence test, four questions for any cost cut or sacrifice, a budget, a layoff, a price increase, a family decision. Number one, the bill. What is the actual cost in real terms stripped of the language? Not we're optimizing or right sizing or finding efficiencies. What specifically is being reduced and by how much? You cannot trace a cost you haven't named. Vague framing is the first defense of a bad distribution. Two, the payer, whose standard of living actually falls, not whose name is on the paperwork. Follow it past the announcement to the person whose clinic closed, whose hours got cut, whose pension shrank, whose weekend disappeared. Ask what share of their total resources this represents. The same dollar is a rounding error to one person and a catastrophic or a catastrophe to another. The ratio is the real story. Three, the beneficiary. Where did the money go or the benefit go? Every cost that lands on someone lands in favor of someone. Sometimes it's a creditor, sometimes it's a shareholder, sometimes just the person who didn't have to give anything up. If nobody can tell you who benefits, either nobody looked or somebody would rather you didn't. Four, the story. What language is making this feel inevitable and fair? Shared sacrifice, we all have to tighten our belts, there is no alternative, it's just math. Test the pronouns. Is the we real? Test the inevitability. Was there another lever that wasn't pulled? A cost presented as law of nature is almost always a choice with a press release.
The bill, the payer, the beneficiary, the story, run it on the thing we just did.
The bill, a genuine debt crisis. That part is real. It wasn't invented. The payer, overwhelmingly people who use public services and drew public wages and pensions. The beneficiary, substantially creditors and bondholders who were made whole. The story, living with their means and shared sacrifice, which tested poorly because the sacrifice wasn't even shared and the means were never the only lever available.
And run it the other direction because we promised. Run it on somebody who says just borrow more, deficits don't matter.
Good, and it works just as well. The bill, the interest, every year forever. The payer, future taxpayers who didn't vote on it, plus anyone hurt if inflation results. The beneficiary, whoever's getting the spending right now, and again, bondholders collecting the interest. The story, we owe it to ourselves. Rates will stay low forever, both of which are claims that need checking, not assumptions.
So it's not a left tool or a right tool.
It's an X-ray, and it doesn't tell you what you want. It tells you where the weight landed, and it can run on Tuesday afternoon at your job.
Company announces a hiring freeze and a temporary benefits change. The bill, fewer people doing the same work. The payer, the people still there absorbing it, unpaid hours. The beneficiary, the margin, the story, we're all in this together.
Said by somebody whose life did not change at all.
Said from a boat, historically. So where do we land? And I'll say it up front what I don't want. I don't want the cheap version where we go austerity, bad, and everybody claps.
Right, because that's not what the evidence says, and that's not what we found. Here's what I think is actually defensible, and I'll say it carefully. Governments do sometimes have to consolidate. Sometimes nobody will lend to you, and the choice is made for you. Debt genuinely does cost something real every year forever. Those parts of the case are true, and I'm not walking them back.
And the part that doesn't survive?
Two things. First, the specific claim that cutting hard during a depressed economy is a responsible move. That got tested on a continent, and the institution that prescribed it published a paper saying they underestimated the damage, and the famous threshold that justified it was substantially a spreadsheet error. That's not my opinion, that's on the official record.
And second,
The word shared, because that's the one that's doing all the real work. A cost is not whether events. It has an address, and somebody chooses that address every time with a lever they pick from several available. When the lever is service cuts, the address is the bottom. When the lever is progressive taxation, it's further up. Same deficit reduction, different lives.
and that's the through line back to the ball, isn't it? 1897?
That's the whole rhyme. In the Depression, 700 people put on $10 million of costumes, and outside the window there were soup lines. And both those facts were the result of choices about rules, about monopolies, about who bargains and who doesn't, about which lever gets pulled. The Gilded Age isn't weather either.
And it ended. That's the part I keep holding on to. It didn't end in a revolution, it ended in a bunch of unglamorous rules that people fought for and won.
Which is the least romantic and most hopeful sentence in the episode.
Your sovereign win this week. Find one shared sacrifice in your own life, not a country, yours. A restructuring at work, a rent increase with an explanation attached, a family arrangement where everybody's supposedly pitching in. Then run the four. What's the actual bill? Who's really paying it? As a share of what they've got? Who benefits? And what story is making it sound inevitable?
And if the sacrifice turns out to be genuinely shared, great, now you know, instead of assuming. That's not cynicism, that's just literacy.
And Dave, the pickle report.
Oh man, Kevin has a budget crisis.
Kevin has a budget crisis. The pickle monopoly overextended. You'll recall he bought the cucumber farm, the vinegar guy, and the jar company. And now he's announced, quote, company wide austerity.
Oh no,
He
oh no.
cut. Oh yeah. No, it gets bad. He cut everyone's hours by 15%. He eliminated the free lunch, which for the record was pickles. And in the same email, Dave, he announced he was awarding himself a founder's retention bonus to quote ensure leadership continually during the tightening.
Yep. He put the incidence test in one email. He did the whole thing in one document.
The bill. He overspent. The payer, 15% of everyone's paycheck. The beneficiary, Kevin, explicitly in writing. The story we're all tightening our belts together, sent from a man who just gave himself a bonus. Go, Kevin.
And is anybody pushing back?
The farmers market co op that formed to destroy him last episode has offered his entire staff jobs, so the pressure found a door again. It's beautiful. It's like watching a nature documentary.
Here's where I land. Every society, sooner or later, has to figure out who pays for the thing that went wrong. That's not avoidable. That's just living together with costs. The only question, the oldest question, is whether that decision gets made in the open, where people can see it and argue about it, or whether it arrives wrapped in language designed to make it feel like gravity.
Costs have addresses.
Costs have addresses, and somebody wrote that address down. Find out who and find out why before you signed that package.
Be the architect.
The Sovereign Investigation, Volume 13, Who Pays the Bill? Every source is in the show notes. Thanks for thinking with us.